I'm going to devote a little time now to a very, very important book by Sinclair Lewis called It Can't Happen Here. This book was written during the last Depression. In fact, just before the last Depression is when it came out, or during the middle of it, and copyrighted 1935. I wouldn't waste your time, but I'm not going to waste your time because you must hear what Sinclair Lewis wrote. Now, I want to remind you, Sinclair Lewis was a socialist. He projected a future America where a right-wing government would take over the country. You hear? Where a right-wing government would take over the country. And he, in his fiction, It Can't Happen Here, Sinclair Lewis wrote, the 15 Points of Victory for the Forgotten Men, written by the Democrat candidate for the United States President, Buzz Windrip. And I'm going to summarize some of these 15 points. During the very first week of his campaign, Senator Windrip clarified his philosophy by issuing his distinguished proclamation, the 15 Points of Victory for the Forgotten Men. Now, I want to remind you, this is a fiction written in 1935 about what would happen to America if a right-winger took over the country. One, all finances in the country, including banking, insurance, stocks and bonds, and mortgages, shall be under the absolute control of a federal central bank, owned by the government, and conducted by a board appointed by the president, which board shall, without need of recourse to Congress for legislative authorization, be empowered to make all regulations governing finance. Two, the president shall appoint a commission equally divided between manual workers, employers, and representatives of the public to determine which labor unions are qualified to represent the workers. Number three, after the revolution, in contradistinction to the doctrines of red radicals. Now remember, this was a projection of what would happen should a right-winger take over the government. In contradistinction to the doctrines of red radicals with their felonious expropriation of the arduously acquired possessions which ensure to aged persons their security, this league and party will guarantee private initiative and the right to private property for all time. 4, believing that only under God Almighty, to whom we render all homage, do we Americans hold our vast power, we shall guarantee to all persons absolute freedom of religious worship, provided, however, that no atheist, agnostic, believer in black magic, nor any Jew who shall refuse to swear allegiance to the New Testament, nor any person of any faith who refuses to take the pledge to the flag, shall be permitted to hold any public office or to practice as a teacher, professor, lawyer, judge, or as a physician, except in the category of obstetrics. 5, annual net income per person shall be limited to $500,000. No accumulated fortune may at any one time exceed $3 million per person. No one person shall during his entire lifetime be permitted to retain an inheritance or various inheritances in total exceeding $2 million. All incomes or estates in excess of the sums named shall be seized by the federal government for use in relief and administrative expenses. Shall I go on? I can go on. Congress shall have the sole right to issue money, and immediately upon our inauguration it shall at least double the present supply of money in order to facilitate the fluidity of credit. Did you hear any of this? Are you listening to me? Or you didn't hear this morning on the Blowhard show, so you don't know what you're listening to? Are you realizing what's going on here? Here it is. I'll read this to you. I'll read this to you from page 69, written in 1935. They realized that this country has gone so flabby that any gang daring enough and unscrupulous enough and smart enough not to seem illegal can grab hold of the entire government and have all the power and applause and salutes, all the money and palaces and will and women they want. They're only a handful. But just think how small Lenin's gang was at first, and Mussolini's and Hitler's and Kemal Pasha's and Napoleon's. You'll see all the liberal preachers and modernist educators and discontented newspapermen and farm agitators, maybe they'll worry at first. But they'll get caught up in the web of propaganda like we all were in the Great War, and they'll all be convinced that even if our president maybe has got a few faults, he's on the side of the plain people and against all the tight old political machines, and they'll rouse the country for him as the great liberator. Did you hear any of this? But will Americans stand for it long, whimpered Emma? Oh, no, not people like us, the descendants of the pioneers. Oh, no? It can't happen here? Shall I repeat to you that it has happened here? Shall I repeat to you who has done this? Are you recognizing the fact that Sinclair Lewis, although he was frightened of a future government taken over by the right wing, did not even see himself as the prophet he was, and that this country would be taken over by a gang of left-wingers, the Obama gang? Are you aware of the fact that the country has been taken over by a gang? A daring gang, an audacious gang, the audacity of revolution. An audacious gang has taken over America. And there they are, ladies and gentlemen, printing money as though they own it, taxing the people who earn the money, and making deals with communists around the world under the guise of peace and freedom. That's my monologue for today. The phone number is 1-800-449-8255. In a moment, we're going to go back to Senator Bernie Sanders grilling Federal Reserve Chairman, the liar, Ben Bernanke, who I frankly would have arrested. If I were in that congressional hearing and Bernanke came before me and I asked him, where did the $2.2 trillion go? Who did you give the money to? And this guy, Bernanke, sits there like God Almighty and says, I'm not going to release the names. I would ask for U.S. Marshals to come in and arrest Bernanke. The reason Sanders didn't do it is because it's all a fix. These are show trials. Listen to clip 15, where Bernanke, the head of the Federal Reserve, refuses to answer where the money went in 15.
We have spent a lot of time in Congress talking about the $700 billion TARP bailout, which I voted against as it happens. Not a whole lot has been talked about with regard to the $2.2 trillion that the Fed has lent out. Now, I find that absolutely extraordinary that I wrote you a letter and I said, hey, who'd you lend the money to? What were the terms of those loans? How can my constituents in Vermont get some of that money? Who makes the decisions? Do you guys sit around in a room? Do you make it? Are there conflicts of interest? My question to you is, will you tell the American people to whom you lent $2.2 trillion of their dollars? Will you tell us who got that money and what the terms are of those agreements?
We explain each of our programs. In terms of the terms, we explain the terms exactly. We explain what the collateral requirements are. We explain what.
To whom did you explain that?
It's on our website.
Yeah, okay.
So all that information is available in our commercial paper program.
And who got the money?
Hundreds and hundreds of banks. Any bank or that has access to the U.S. Federal Reserve's discount.
Will you tell us who they are?
No.
He does not answer. He does not say where the money went. Ladies and gentlemen, I rest my case. I'll be right back. And that is why I've read to you from Sinclair Lewis's It Can't Happen Here. That book was written in 1935 during the Great Depression, when Sinclair Lewis, the socialist, feared Hitler, feared Franco, feared nationalism, and projected a right-wing takeover of America. Little did he know that his fiction would one day describe the left-wing takeover of America by Barack Hussein Obama, who many people question, whose citizenship many millions of people are questioning. In fact, it is such a big story, and I'm not going to talk about it. Don't call me about it, okay? So many people question it that the left-wing Yahoo, the left-wing news sites like that write for children, are calling those who question Obama's official place of birth birthists or something to that effect. So it's starting to seep through to the mainstream, and it will eventually become a big story. You understand that? We have men of superior cunning and a very sly foxiness running this country. You might call them leaders, you might call them comrades, you might call them brethren, you might call them commissars, you might call them patriots, you might call them little brothers of the poor. But the fact of the matter is these men have superior cunning and very, very sly foxiness, and they are running a web around your head. I've never seen anything happen so fast in this country, with a meltdown leading us to trickle-up poverty at a speed that I never envisioned it happening. Now, I want you to take the arc of what Obama has done so far and project it ahead 2 years, 3 years, and 4 years, and ask yourself, if this man is not stopped, what this country will look like, what your family will look like, and whether your freedoms will be intact in 3 or 4 years unless this man is opposed at every turn.